Hello and welcome to The Extras, where we take you behind the scenes of your favorite TV shows, movies, and animation, and their release on digital, DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, or your favorite streaming site. I'm Tim Millard, your host. Today, George Feltenstein joins the show for part 2 of our review of the Warner Archive January 2023 Blu-ray releases. Hi, George. It's good to talk with you today.
It's great to be with you, Tim, as always.
Well, before we dive into the 3 films that are in the part 2 of the January discussion, I thought it'd be fun to, because the first 2 have actually already released, I thought it'd be fun to kind of hear from you what you're hearing from fans, because I'm hearing great things about people who have received their product already.
Well, I've been thrilled to read comments from people who have received their discs, which were a little late, but they got them pretty quickly. And when they saw them, both Our Dancing Daughters and Rancho Notorious, each for their own specific reasons, are revelatory in terms of the improvement from what people have seen previously and what are in the new restored Blu-rays. And I am just delighted, and I expect there will be more people receiving their discs en masse by the time this podcast goes live. And the same about the 3 films that we're going to discuss shortly. It's very, very exciting. I did want to note that there will be more. This is going to be a very, very exciting year. We've made some changes dealing with staff being kind of moved around and between the holidays and everything else, it's kind of created some problems. But we were able to get those out pretty close to street date. And I've seen a few comments and one wonderful review, and I am looking forward to seeing more. And I just want everybody to be really thrilled with what we have to offer, which is perfect opportunity to start talking about the rest of January.
Yeah, let's do that. We've got 3 films. Which one do you want to dive into first, George?
Well, I think it would be best to talk about the one that I expect to be the most popular of the 3, not to denigrate any of the others. They're all exceptional in their own way, but the one that we've had the most exciting response from since we announced it is the long trailer with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. And I think part of the reason for that is, aside from people who love Lucy, people who love I Love Lucy, there's another contingent of fans of this film. And that is people who have experiences with big trailers. It's like that's a thing,
right? And
it's got its own following. And there are many people who have memories of growing up with a big trailer like that and so forth and so on. So beyond your classic film enthusiast, beyond the general audience or people who follow Vincent Minnelli as an auteur, you've got this whole other component of people that love this movie. So that's very, very exciting. And this film has, in my mind, is another one that's always looked terrible. And there are a lot of reasons for that in the past. I think that the last master done, and probably the ones before that, were all done off of 4th generation elements.
Oh, wow.
I've talked about before how when a film is very, very popular, that can often lead to the original negative or other elements being highly damaged from use.
Right.
And going back to the negative was usually something we couldn't do, nor could our predecessors who were making video masters 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 40 years ago. Because actually 40 years ago, the long trailer was likely on Showtime, because the MGM films from the 50s were on Showtime like in 1982 and 83.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably the first time people were seeing these films on television, not from 16 millimeter prints. Unless you grew up in New York, because WPIX in New York actually had the MGM package and showed films off 35 millimeter. But I digress. This is directly from the camera negative, which was shot in Ansco color, which was a very briefly used process. And it has a really unique look. And I'm used to seeing it so washed out and faded, and it always looked awful. The DVD looked awful. The Laserdisc looked awful. The VHS looked awful. This looks great. And it sounds great. And most importantly, you get to see Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz really, while they were at their apex of having the number one television show in the country and taking their hiatus from their hit television series to make a movie with one of the great, in my opinion, one of the greatest directors of the golden age of Hollywood, Vincent Minnelli. And it was based on a best-selling book. And from what I understand, that the screenplay is pretty faithful to the original book. I believe they changed the names of the main characters to be very similar to Lucy and Ricky. Instead, you have Tacy and Nikki. And I don't believe those were the names of the characters in the book. If I'm wrong about that, I've never read the book, so take that at face value. But I always found that to be a little kind of like, really? You felt you had to change their names? But
Right.
they wanted to distinguish this from television. And they wanted to distinguish this from the characters that Lucy and Desi played as Lucy and Ricky. And you can tell from the very beginning of the movie that they, since they're under the skillful direction of Minnelli, they're handling things with a different touch. And I've loved this film since I was a little kid and saw it on TV. It was always one I never wanted to miss. And it has been consistently popular. It did wonderful at the box office for MGM when it was released. It did wonderfully when it was shown on television initially and in syndication, and was a big seller, video cassette and DVDs for years. So we had a Lucy Desi 3-pack. And now we finally get to make this beautiful master in the proper aspect ratio. And MGM's non-cinemascope aspect ratio for widescreen was 1.75. And they kept that for a couple of years. So this film was presented exactly as it was meant to be seen when it was released. And we're delighted with how it looks. I think the comedy holds up tremendously. It really shows you how gifted both Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were. And, you know, there have been books written about Lucille Ball praising her gifts and her talents, and her fan base is enormous. And I think Lucy said this in her later years, both before Desi passed away and afterwards, that he was never given enough credit for what he brought to both their television series and to this movie. He's really terrific in it. And I do think the film, you know, it had a little bit of the slapstick element that Lucille Ball would be involved with on the I Love Lucy show. But it very realistically dealt with a young married couple forsaking various other things to have a trailer instead of a normal house. And that was in the day when a young married couple could actually afford to buy a house instead of having to wait until their later years. Anyway, I think it's a wonderful kind of time capsule of 1953/54. This was filmed in 53 and released early in 1954. And it works on so many levels. And then you get supporting performances that are impressive from Marjorie Main and all of the people in the film are terrific. And it has that light comedic touch that Vincent Minnelli brought to the comedy films he directed. I always praise Vincent Minnelli for being expert at directing virtually every genre I can think of. I don't think he certainly never made a horror movie, but he made some dark dramas that could be considered film noir. But he's just amazing in what he could do. And I think this reminds me of the same sensibility he brought to Father of the Bride, which was a massive success in 1950. You know, there are other comedies too that I'm very fond of. The 1963 film The Courtship of Eddie's Father with Glenn Ford and Shirley Jones and Ronnie Howard. Designing Woman with Gregory Peck and Lauren Bacall is a wonderful comedy. Of course, he's best known for his musicals, but there were also dark, wonderful dramas like Some Came Running and The Bad and the Beautiful. He could do anything. And his sense of visual style is apparent no matter what the genre. So you feel that light touch in the comedy, in the way he works with the actors. Even his films that don't overall work, and there are a few of them that aren't as good as all the great ones, they still have great things in them. So the praise goes all around for everybody. And I think fans will appreciate that as on the DVD, we have in high definition, we have Dixieland Droopy, and you also get an MGM short from the Pete Smith Specialties series. And it's called Ain't It Aggravating? Or Aggravatin'. There's a little, got to say it properly.
Right.
But this is the concept that we sort of use with Warner Night, the movies. This is an MGM movie, not a Warner movie, but we own it now. But if you were to go to see this movie, let's say at a Lowe's movie theater in 1954, you would have seen it with an MGM cartoon and an MGM short. And that's the way you get it here. And I'm delighted to have it be part of the January lineup.
Well, I have not had a chance to see it. I'm really excited because there's so many great, visuals of the, I guess it's of the Mount Whitney area where they're driving up that very dangerous road. I like to go up there myself and camp and enjoy that part of the Sierras. And then also Yosemite. I'm looking forward to seeing those visuals all now redone, with a beautiful Blu-ray when that comes out. It should be terrific.
It's gorgeous. And I'll just add in a very interesting aside. I was producing a CD several years ago from MGM movies. It was called Romantic Duets from MGM Classics or something. I don't know how we did the subtitle exactly, but it was Romantic Duets, and they were all from MGM films. So I wanted to have Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz singing Breezing Along with the Breeze from this film. And I knew it from the film, and they turn on the radio, and there's kind of like a little jazz combo coming over the radio, and,
Right.
So when I brought in the recording session masters, I was shocked to find it had originally been recorded with them backed by a full orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And they must have gotten a sense that that wasn't quite the right feel for this movie. So they changed it to a backing from a light jazz combo. And it does serve the film really well because it would kind of take you out of the more realistic experience. But I found that quite fascinating. And subsequently, my friend Lucas Kendall produced a whole soundtrack album of the Long, Long Trailer with all of its music on it. And that's now out of print in a highly collectible item. That album, if my memory is correct, it had the score for both the Long, Long Trailer and the other film that MGM distributed with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, Forever Darling. And the music from both films, I believe, Lucas put on his terrific CD. So those who want to look for it, I bet, you might pay a premium for it, but there are probably people selling it on eBay for a very large amount of money. Thankfully, the Blu-ray is at a very reasonable price. So,
right. Well, we've got two more films, both of which are, I know, have a lot of fans out there. Which one do you want to dive into next, George?
Well, I think I've got Oscar on the brain, so I'm thinking about the Best Actor Oscar from 1939, which didn't go as everybody expected to Clark Gable for Gone with the Wind, shockingly, and no, it didn't go to James Stewart for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, two of the most iconic American film performances ever.
Right.
No, the winner that year, and it was a tough year, was Robert Donat for Goodbye, Mr. Chips. And Mr. Donat was a very exceptional British actor, did not make a lot of films. From what I understand, he was troubled frequently by health issues, and indeed, he passed away at a very young age. But he kind of had a real golden period and had really broken through with Alfred Hitchcock's 39 Steps, which also put Hitchcock on the map in a big way on a multinational basis, not just in England. And after that, I think it was in 1938, he filmed The Citadel for MGM with Rosalind Russell at MGM's newly built British studios. And then the following year, James Hilton's novel, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, was brought to the screen starring Robert Donat in the title role of Mr. Chips, Chipping, the boys' school instructor, and the impact he had as an individual. It's a salute to everybody who has chosen teaching as a profession, because teachers can have such an incredible impact on their students that lasts the rest of their lives.
Right.
And I happen to be prejudiced in that respect because my mom, well, she's no longer teaching. She's retired, but she had students in elementary school for decades. And I get such a kick out of it because one of them was in, I believe, either the Clinton administration or the Obama administration. And one of them is a big writer for the New York Times. And these are just a couple of kids that I know about. But, people approach me often and say, how can I get in touch with your mother? And it always touches me deeply.
Yeah.
And I know there are teachers that I had as a kid who I still think of the impact they've made on my life. So a movie that glorifies or shines a light on the importance of the teaching profession, and more importantly, that we don't value teachers enough in our society, I think. And this is a film that is not only a tribute to Mr. Chips, but it's also a tribute to love. It's a wonderful love story. He plays a very shy, very kind of meek, quiet gentleman whose world is burst open when on a vacation he falls in love with this lovely young lady. And it was Greer Garson in her film debut. And Greer Garson had been discovered by L.B. Mayer while he was on a trip to London. And that was her first film for MGM, shot at the British studio. And then after that big success with Goodbye, Mr. Chips, she was sent to Culver City. And being sent to Culver City to basically be one of MGM's top stars for over a decade is pretty thrilling. And this was her very, very first film. And they're terrific together.
They really
are. And it was directed by Sam Wood, who was a very prolific MGM director, and I think is best known for having directed the Marx Brothers in A Night at the Opera. And he was a terrific director. And after this film, Miss Garson went on to star in Pride and Prejudice, and then she was teamed with Walter Pidgeon in a series of movies, and she won the Oscar in 1942 for the titular role in Mrs. Miniver, which also won the Best Picture for MGM that year, and is also available on Blu-ray from Warner Brothers Home Entertainment. It's been out for quite some time. So the romance between the two of them is lovely. The acting performance is unforgettable. You can see why so many people, were so supportive of Mr. Donat. Sadly, he passed away in the late 1950s. And I believe his last film appearance was posthumous. That he had a small role in a film called The Inn of the Sixth Happiness. And that wasn't released until after he had passed away. So it's wonderful that this performance is preserved. And speaking of preservation, the source for this master was the best we could find, and that was a nitrate dupe negative that we didn't even know about, and we were able to access it from an international archive on loan. And it was much better than the fourth and fifth generation elements we had here, because this film was so popular that all the elements were run into the ground. This is not, as pristine as you would get if you were coming off of a negative that, hadn't been touched at all because the film wasn't shown a lot. This film was re-released more than once, and I'm sure that there were a lot of prints made off that original negative, because by my tracing the lineage of the elements, I think that original element was gone decades ago. I think it was even before the big fire. It was gone. Right. So finding this nitrate dupe negative will really be revelatory to people, because film looks better than it's ever looked in a very, very long time. And I think it's going to be a delightful addition to the Warner Archive collection.
And are there any extras on this release, George?
The only extra that's on this release is a trailer. But believe it or not, the DVD did not have a trailer.
Wow.
And I remember when the DVD was coming out, trying to fight to get the trailer on there, but I lost the battle. This time, there was no battle, and the trailer is there. So it just seemed appropriate to leave it just that way. And I'm very excited for people to see it and hear it. We restore the audio as well as the video. So picture and sound look really terrific, sound really terrific. And I'm very, very pleased and honored to be releasing this film.
I've only seen it on DVD, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the better image quality and everything. But I mean, the story just stands for itself. I mean, it's just, as you were saying, both my grandmothers were teachers and both my parents were teachers. So we have a real respect for the profession. But it's very different because this is a professor in an English, school. It's very different from here in America. And
a boys' school, no less.
Yeah. But I guess it's so poignant, right? Because it covers the life, and that's always poignant. But man, every time I see the movie, I just wish that Greer could be on screen longer. You know what I mean? It's just.
Well, I didn't want to give any plot points away, but yeah. I'm totally in agreement with you. It's truly a treasure, and that's why it became an instant classic. And 1939, it's been said a million times by me and countless other people, by far the greatest year in Hollywood history. Each studio produced at least 10 great films that stand on their own. Here at Warner Brothers, we had Dark Victory and The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex and Dodge City, Juarez, and at MGM they were distributing Gone with the Wind, and they had made The Wizard of Oz and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Babes in Arms and The Women.
Wow.
And Goodbye, Mr. Chips. I mean, it was an incredible year. Every studio had knockouts. Even Universal bounced back with Son of Frankenstein. It was an incredible year, and it was really Hollywood at its apex because the unfortunate outbreak of World War II in Europe had a cataclysmic effect on the rest of the world and changed Hollywood and changed movie making. And this is, the byproduct of everything before things went south. And it's not only that, but the films that came out of MGM's British studio were very, very high caliber. They had very talented people there, but they usually flew their directors over from Culver City. Not always,
Right.
but a lot of the time.
Well, I'm just amazed that this was the freshman, or, the debut of Greer Garson. She's just so natural. I mean, so beautiful in this. And you can just see why she, immediately became a huge star for the studio. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, you watch that performance and you think this is a, actress with a whole career in her past. And it's just so good. Well, there's one more film to talk about, George.
Yes, because we've gotten to the bottom of the alphabet. No, I'm just kidding. This has always been just a confection and a delight. Wife versus Secretary, where you get not one, not two, but three superstars from MGM's golden age in the 1930s when they were the studio with more stars than there are in heaven. And the leading man is none other than Clark Gable. And since it's wife versus secretary, the wife is the magnificent Myrna Loy. And the secretary is blonde bombshell herself, Jean Harlow. And all under the inspired direction of one of MGM's great directors, whose career spanned from the silent era all the way to the early 50s, Clarence Brown. And he's one of my favorite of the MGM directors. And it's not a screwball comedy. It's a romantic comedy with little flares of drama. It's very well written. And it is just continued proof of the power and enduring magnetism of Clark Gable as a star, Myrna Loy as a star, Jean Harlow as a star. They all etched their immortal legacy of cinema history in films like Wife versus Secretary. Now, each one of those performers had a few pictures that maybe weren't so great, but very rarely. And of course, Jean Harlow passed away at age 26, and she barely had a decade in the business. And yet, almost every film she made, other than the films where she had bit parts, but films that she starred in really from, let's say, 1932 forward, almost all of them are top drawer, wonderful. And I love seeing the dynamic between the two leading ladies and Gable. The writing is just spot on. And it also shows the perfection of MGM as a studio in terms of the set decoration, the art direction, the costumes, the lighting. Everything is just gorgeous. And this new Blu-ray makes the film look spectacular. And like all of our recent releases, this is a 4K scan from the best element. In this case, a preservation safety fine grain that was made off the original negative in the 1960s. And we've restored both picture and sound. And it is my hope that we can bring the filmographies of all these talents to Blu-ray. I would love to see that happen. We're working on it. We have probably several dozen films in various states of production, but it takes time and care to actually get there. And each film we bring to Blu-ray is the byproduct of the work of countless people on so many levels. And people need to realize how much goes into creating the end product having such excellence. And this is a delightful film, and it's really hard to believe that it's 87 years old.
Wow.
So it was 1936. So that year, Gable, Loy, and Harlow made other films. As a matter of fact, the Warner Archive collection has labeled Lady from 1936 with Myrna Loy and Jean Harlow, but not Clark Gable. Instead, you get William Powell and Spencer Tracy. Not bad, right?
Right. Well, even in this film, you've got another star, James Stewart.
Yes, in a small supporting role as he was working his way up the ladder. He's not a build above the title, but Stewart plays the sometime boyfriend, an ultimate, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's certainly the man in love with Jean Harlow.
Right.
Let's put it that way. And I really like seeing his character develop. And I think he was about 26, 27 at the time. He had just signed with MGM recently, and he had been in After the Thin Man, which either came before or after this. I don't know the exact chronology. But he was doing a lot of different films, and they were really priming him for stardom. And he certainly got there pretty quickly, but he's terrific in it. The supporting cast is, of course, wonderful. And it's a terrific treat. It really, really is.
And are there any extras on this release, George?
Yes, we have a classic MGM short, and I believe we have a classic MGM cartoon. And, of course, we have the original theatrical trailer. So it's a lovely package and sure to entertain.
Well, I'm looking forward to all of these three that we've just discussed. I know on our Facebook group, people are very anxious to get these, and people put in their pre-orders. So I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's response when they eventually get these. And this is coming out very soon here on the 24th of January.
Yeah, so if you're hearing this after the 24th of January, that means they've already come out.
Right.
So you can run to your computer and order them. And if you're getting this early, you can put in your pre-order and get it on street date, which actually is a good segue for me to kind of raise an important and timely issue. And that is that we have had a lot of internal changes. I don't think it's any secret that there have been changes made within Warner Brothers Discovery in order to try to clean up the mess that they found when they became our owners. And I think they're doing a great job at trying to bring the company back to a greater state of health. And in the process of that, there's been a lot of reorganization, and we've had to lose some really wonderful people. But because of that and moving things around, that combined with the holiday season set our release schedule kind of askew. And I had hoped and prayed that the January 10th titles would be on people's doorsteps on January 10th. And it almost happened, but things were late. And that is not acceptable to me. And I don't want that to happen again. And because of all these changes and our demand for perfection, we've made the difficult decision, but I think it's the right decision. We've moved what had planned to be our February releases into March. So we will have 6 titles coming in March, but they will be, once they're announced and you become aware of what their street dates are, you will be able to order them with the confidence of knowing that they will arrive, trusting the retailer does their part of the job. They'll arrive on time. And it's a very exciting group of films. I think people are going to be really happy when they find out what we have planned. So I wanted to get the message out to our loyal customers that the February releases are delayed, but everything we have planned for the year, not one title has been taken off the schedule. People are working feverishly to get these things done. And I think people will also notice that the March titles, aside from being 6 for the month, they're all a little bit more loaded with extras, Tim.
Oh, nice.
Than the January titles. And they're all new 4K scans off Best Elements, and it's a very diverse and exciting group of films. And we're trying to please everyone with a broad swath of genres and periods of time. And I feel confident that people will be very happy with everything that's coming in store. And there's going to be some real surprises and a lot of highly requested titles.
Well, based off of the 5 that have come out here in January, I think it's a great start to the year. Okay, there's going to be a slight delay with the February moving into March, but as you say, it's just a little, it's kind of a logistical issue. It feels like just a little workflow scenario. And the titles, once they're announced, you can get them pre-ordered and then just know that they're going to, rather than being late February, they're just going to move into March.
Exactly. February is a short month, and we had the holidays in there, and the way everything kind of worked out, we don't want to rush anything. We want to make sure everything goes through a very careful quality control, and we want the net result to be something that we can be proud of and that consumers will be happy to own.
Yeah.
And I apologize for the delay on behalf of everybody who's working so hard, but we made the decision to not put everything in a vice and, drive everybody crazy to try to make a date like we did with Rancho, Notorious, and Our Dancing Daughters. People were going out of their minds trying to make that date. And ultimately, January 10th came and people were like, oh, no,
right.
And we had difficulties with getting product out when it was supposed to come out years ago. And we finally solved those problems. So we don't want to go back to that. I hope people will understand that it's ultimately about promising something for a specific date and delivering on that date. And I feel confident that we're going to be able to do that with this sextet that's coming up.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. And obviously, we want you to come back on to talk about those when we get closer to that. But as always, George, thank you so much for coming on, letting people know what these 3 films are about and kind of reviewing all of the January stuff. And then also just really honestly sharing with us what's happening with the February ones so that everybody can have the information that they need.
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I'm so glad to see your Facebook group taking off. And it's wonderful to see the enthusiasm of the customers and that they're pleased with what we're doing. And on behalf of everybody here, we are deeply indebted to you, Tim, for helping to promote these releases on the extras. And we're very grateful to our customers for their continued support.
Well, it's always great to have George Feltenstein on to review the Warner Archive releases, and this January slate has been a great way to start 2023. For those of you interested in purchasing the films we discussed today, there are links in the podcast show notes and on our website at www.theextras.tv, so be sure and check those out. If this is the first episode of The Extras you've listened to and you enjoyed it, please think about following the show at your favorite podcast provider. And if you're on social media, be sure and follow the show on Facebook or Twitter at The Extras TV or Instagram at theextras.tv to stay up to date on our upcoming guests and to be a part of our community. And you're invited to a new Facebook group for fans of Warner Brothers films called the Warner Archive and Warner Brothers Catalog Group. So look for that link on the Facebook page or in the podcast show notes. And for our long-term listeners, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review at iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. Until next time, you've been listening to Tim Millard. Stay slightly obsessed.